Be grateful for that. I don't know what fills your muddy memory slot from Wednesday the 1st of November to Friday the 10th of November. Perhaps if you reflect on those days, you feel an ache in your skull. The mash of your gray matter is a hydraulic press. There's a small part of you that knows, isn't there? You've forgotten something. Try not to remember. I don't want to think about what would happen to you. 9 months later, there's no mention of me anywhere. No articles, no recordings from concerts. I deleted my entire collection and online presence just to be sure, but that was an unnecessary cherry on top. I didn't just rewrite folks' memories, but existence itself. And I did it to save myself, to save you. I was a famous artist known as Fen, which is my given name. Quite a unique one, I was told by numerous record labels over the years. However, success eluded me. Still, I kept myself grounded. By mid-2023, I was quite proud of the 300 hardcore fans that I had gained on YouTube. It's a shame that anything under 1 million subscribers equates to zero in the detached eyes of music executives. Wow, Mr. Lewis said, removing the bulky headphones. The guitar, the songwriting, your voice, mind-blowing. You have a rare ability to write captivating earworms, Fen. I'll be hearing that melody in my head for days. There was always that lingering, but it's just not viable right now. The producer finished, delivering the oh-so-familiar death blow. You're fantastic, Fen, but there are 1 million fantastic musicians in the world. We don't have the resources to sign them all. I stifled a groan. What do I need to do to stand out? I'm awful at marketing, but the few fans I have found all sing my praises. They say that I deserve to be bigger. And I agree with them. Mr. Lewis nodded. But the world doesn't work that way, Fen. Talent is only part of the equation. Why was Billie Eilish more successful than Cindy Cool? Cindy Cool? I repeated. Exactly, the producer smugly replied. Money, marketing, connections, luck. You need at least one of them. I stood, ego bruised and tongue still. I accepted the brutality of business, but I had reached the end of the road. 29 years old with nothing to show for it. In such a youthful industry, I might as well have been 99 years old. I was past my sell-by date, but it had been a fun run. 10 years of chasing a pipe dream. I hadn't devoted my full time and attention to music, admittedly, because I was holding down a part-time job to pay the bills. Nevertheless, it hadn't happened, and it wasn't ever going to happen. Now, all of that is true in a natural timeline. Fen gives up, joins the adult world, but something very unnatural happened as I was exiting the record label's lobby. Did he crush you? A man asked. I stopped in front of the revolving doors. I should have kept moving, wallowing in the humiliation and daydreaming of my future. My plan to become an adult with a real job. I was going to ditch the part-time gig at the theater's concession stand, instead putting my degree to good use and becoming a business analyst. I was going to turn my body and soul to pulp, as every good grown-up should. I had kept the party going as long as possible. That was more than most people could say. Besides, I was thrilled to some degree at the prospect of making my parents and the taxman proud. Oh, don't write me off just yet, Mom and Dad. I work at hoity-toity Name and Smithson. Say bye-bye to the hippie garbs and electric guitar. I now study only the sacred capitalistic scripture. I'm a CPAP chap. I dabble in cutover tasks, implementations, burn-down charts. You don't know what any of that means, but you don't care, do you? It sounds mighty important, sounds mighty mature, and that's enough. On my gravestone, they'll write, Fen Davies, 1995 to 2045. That boy knew how to analyze a thing or two. Died of a heart attack at 50, but my word, he was a simple fellow. Never kept us awake with worry at night. Never did anything of note, in fact. I hear you now, Mom. Hallelujah, Fen is normal. Man, that was a close one. But it's our own fault, of course. We never should have given him such an oddball name. You were right, darling. We should have called him Steve. I was lost in that self-deprecating stream of thought, but the stranger in the lobby distracted me from my inner spiral. It didn't take much, of course, to distract me from such a drab plan for my future. I'm usually too introverted to engage with strangers, but I made the terrible mistake of turning to face the man in the lobby. Pardon? I asked. The gentleman was small. He had made himself small by hunching over in the squeaking armchair by the doors. He was a middle-aged fellow with a receding hairline and eyes to match. That is the best way to describe his brown, faded pupils, which were rolling towards the back of his head. Still visible, but lost to another world. The brown specks threatened to disappear beyond his upper eyelids. "You've just seen Mr. Lewis, I assume?" he inquired. I nodded. Yes. The man huffed. A tosspot. I lightly chortled at an insult that I hadn't heard since Will Kenny stole Jim Brennan's bag of Skittles in year 2. The hunching fellow then straightened his back a little before waving a hand apologetically. "Not you. Him," he said. "Right," I smiled, eyeing the revolving doors in my peripheral vision. "I've gotta go now, so..." "Where?" the man interrupted. "To meet another dismissive producer or uninterested manager." I sighed, massaging my upper nose with a thumb and a forefinger. "Do you work here?" He shook his head. "No. The name's Heath Brandon." "Fen," I answered. "Be honest, you don't really have anywhere to be right now, do you, Fen?" Heath asked, patting the seat of the armchair beside his. I frowned. "I have a shift at the theater." "When?" Heath queried. "In about an hour or so," I said, wondering why I was answering truthfully. "Perfect," the man replied, patting the seat beside him again. I obliged, but I chose to face the lobby ahead rather than his unnerving eyes. As I settled into the armchair, I told myself that it wouldn't hurt to network a little bit. I told myself that Heath Brandon must have some link to the music industry, given that he was sitting in this lobby. I needed to put myself out there after all. In truth, I didn't believe any of that. There was no good reason for sitting beside Heath Brandon. Every instinct begged me to get up and leave. "Won't we get in trouble for loitering here?" I asked, nodding at the receptionist. "None of them notice a thing," he said. I paused, searching for a good response, but I had none. The strange man was right. The receptionist hadn't even clocked me at the desk earlier. Not until I had asked for assistance 2 or 3 times. Her disdain was immeasurable, likely due to the continuous influx of hopeful musicians who strolled through those ever-revolving doors. I was simply a forgettable face in the mix, and I didn't realize that was a privilege. "Who are you, Heath? You don't work here, so why are you sitting in this lobby?" "Do I not look like a rock star to you, Fen?" the man asked, smiling in a way neither warm nor cold. It was a smile that didn't communicate anything at all. I weakly returned the expression. "Sorry, are you waiting to see someone?" Heath let out a chuckle closer to a stuttering engine than a display of human emotion. "Fen, I'm always waiting to see someone like you." My heart lifted a little and I wondered whether I had been right. I thought for a moment that I had been wise to ignore my gut feeling because Heath had been a worthwhile network connection all along. It seemed that I had made the right decision for once in my non-existent musical career. "What do you mean?" I asked nonchalantly. "I've not heard of any of your music," Heath replied, "but I know it's good." I rolled my eyes. "How? Do I have the look, the star factor?" "No, not at all," the man said with unintentional severity. I smirked. "Oh, thanks." "Nobody's born with that star quality, Fen," Heath explained. but millions of people are born with talent. Mr. Lewis gave you that spiel, didn't he? He'll have used it to pave over the cracks of his rather cruel rejection. I nodded. Well, the man isn't wrong. You are one of those talented people. I see it in your eyes, too. You're tired, Fen, tired of being overlooked. And you're not delusional. My gut is never wrong. Like so many before you, you're on the verge of greatness. I've heard this spiel before too, I'm afraid. I sighed. Every famous artist was once a nobody. And how do you become a somebody? That's what you want to know, isn't it? Heath asked. Do you have some magical answer? I laughed. Yes, he answered with absolute sincerity. I can make you famous, but you must understand what fame entails. I grimaced, suddenly suspecting that I had wasted a few minutes of my day. Heath became, to my eyes, a mentally unwell stranger who had wandered into the record label's main lobby, one who had gone unnoticed by the disengaged receptionist. I felt my cheeks redden as I started to believe that I had been suckered. I was so desperate for stardom that anybody could have sold me the moon. You don't believe me, Heath said in response to my long silence. You think that I must be some crackpot. I shrugged. If the shoe fits. What is fame if not a stroke of magic? He asked. Mr. Lewis puts it down to money, marketing, connections, or luck. Maybe a combination of all four, but he's wrong. It's magic. I was disconcerted by the man's verbatim echo of Mr. Lewis, but the quick-moving conversation derailed my train of thought. Listen, I started. This has been lovely, but... But what? Heath interjected, a hint of aggression in his tone. And for the first time since meeting him, the mysterious man's disposition shifted from harmless to threatening. For the first time, I felt something other than embarrassment. I was afraid. I really have to go, I said unsteadily. And sit in your car for... Heath paused to check his watch. 55 minutes. Then you'll stand behind the Palace Theater's concession stand for several hours. You'll overhear the performances of actors and singers who have found their dreams. Meanwhile, you'll shovel, pick, and mix into grotty containers. Does that sound right? You said you don't work here, I bluntly replied, starting to feel irritated. I don't see how you would be able to help me. Oh, I can help you, but I'm not going to show you what lies behind the curtain, Heath said, suddenly slipping a clipboard from the shadowy depths of his fuzzy jacket. If you want success, sign here. I took the clipboard from the man and then read the oddly brief and oddly worded document clipped to it. I, as the artist, hereby sign myself to Red and Tinny Records, which shall hereinafter be referenced as RTR. I hereby agree that this contract affords RTR the right to 50% of all profits, monetary and otherwise, from the artist's career. I accept that RTR will promote the artist to attain ever-growing success, and I accept the results of that success. By signing below, I agree to the terms and conditions of this document. Artist name, date. Don't sign just yet, Heath said. I wasn't planning on doing so. I whispered, heart pumping at the fact that a record label merely wanted me. Why didn't you just tell me that you work for a rival company? I'm surprised that Mr. Lewis hadn't cottoned onto your game and kicked you out of here. He doesn't notice, the man said, repeating his earlier line with a little more ice. Let's talk about the legality of the contract. Let's talk about fame and its dangers. I know, it corrupts the mind, inflates the ego. No, Heath shook his head. That isn't what I want to discuss. You will stay grounded, Fen. You're a good man. You don't even know me, I pointed out, but thank you. And you do not know me, he coldly replied. But I know this industry. There is always a price. You should consider that before signing. When it comes to the perils of fame, think less about yourself and more about those who follow you. I smiled more broadly. That's the appeal. Right now, I only have a handful of followers and their comments warm my heart. Reaching a wider audience and amplifying that influx of positivity, I'm excited about that prospect. Heath nodded. Music is a powerful thing, as is a book and a film as well, as is any work of art that might bring a person fame and fortune. But I started as sensing the lingering word with which I had become well accustomed. You want to reach the masses, the man said. You want not only to create music but for it to be heard and appreciated. For thousands upon thousands of people to tell you that you have changed their lives. That'll fix you, won't it, Fan? That'll make you feel like more than a drop in a large pool. My face whitened as Heath's scanning eyes passed over my brain, tugging at the strands of my innermost insecurities. The crooked man knocked and bruised a few nerves as he searched. But you won't be a person to them, Heath warned, pupils nearly vanishing as they rolled closer to the edges of his eyelids. They won't see Fen, the young man who just wanted the world to hear his art. They'll see something that belongs to them, the one who gifts songs that speak to their experiences, love, loss, and the passage of time. Whatever words you spill into their ears will not tell the tales of Fen Davies, but the tales of his followers. And later, I would feel a pang of fear, wondering how Heath had known my surname. But later than that, following the most hellish week of my life, I would not wonder at all, and it would not terrify me to the same extent as the other happenings. While sitting in the studio's lobby, I was focusing only on the glistening contract in my lap. It outshone Heath's glaring words of caution. My dream was about to come true. To be heard was all that I had ever wanted. It wasn't about the money. My parents would have fainted at such an admission. But I was fine with the theater's generous offering of minimum wage. It was always about the fame. I wanted to be on stage. I wanted thousands of people to sing my songs. And I wanted to sign that contract without even consulting a lawyer. But I managed to restrain myself. May I have a digital version of this? I want to send it to my friend. He doesn't work in the music industry, but he's a legal expert, I think. This is time-sensitive, Fen, Heath interjected, the veins at the bottom of his eyeballs starting to peek at me. He's clearly been bumping something, I thought, but I don't give a shit. If a manager needs to be as high as a kite to even consider signing me, then let the blow flow. You're really going to rush me? I asked. The man paused, clearly searching for a lie. I'm old-fashioned, Fen. I've never been one for technology. And the industry is fast-moving, you know this. Yeah, technology's a big part of the modern music industry, I pointed out. The old ways still work, Heath grumbled. I sighed. Let me give my friend a call at least. This is a very brief contract. I'll read it to him. Heath was about to say something, but he reconsidered. Fine. With trembling fingers, I hurriedly dialed Paul, my former bandmate and dear friend. I was thankful that he had picked up. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. That's a lie, of course. I would have signed the contract without any legal consultation at all. Hey, Fanny, Paul answered. What's up? I'm about to head into a meeting. You're having one right now, I chuckled. Let me read you a contract. It'll only take a minute. I beg your pardon. A contract for what? I read the document aloud, hoping that it would serve as both an explanation and a pleasant surprise for one of my closest friends. His reaction was the one that I had expected. Jesus, Fan. You jammy dodger, well done. Hey, at least one of us sees the dream. I laughed. It's crazy, isn't it? What do you think? He sighed. I mean, I'm happy that you finally caught the eye of a label, but look, this is a strange one. It's an incredibly short contract. There are so many things this company hasn't stipulated. Have you even researched Red and Tinny Records? No, I replied. It's sort of a time-sensitive thing. Well, that's a red flag in itself, Fen, Paul warned. I just want to know whether or not the contract ticks all the boxes. I mean, does anything sound fishy? Well, I would prefer to see it written down. I accept the result of that success. Yeah, that's the sentence which sticks out like a sore thumb. From a legal standpoint, I asked. No, but... Time is ticking, Mr. Davies, Heath warned. Is that him? Is the guy sitting there and waiting for you to make a decision? You're being pressured, Fen. I don't like any of it. Is it a sound contract, Paul? I asked again. My friend mumbled something incoherently, but he eventually released a sigh. It's legally dubious, but not necessarily illegal. However, you should be alarmed by the very fact that I remember every word of the contract. It shouldn't. And be that short, I finished. I know, but I have to sign it, Paul. You know that I do. Paul moaned uncomfortably. I'm not saying any of this is a lawyer, Fen. I'm saying it as your friend. This is one of the least trustworthy contracts that I've ever come across. The whole thing smells. And I just Googled the name of the label and I didn't find any mention of. Technology is noise. We don't have an online presence, Heath interrupted, his keen ears having somehow heard my friend's voice through the receiver. I think that I would like a decision now, Fen. I'm doing it, I whispered, hanging up the phone before Paul had another chance to protest. I knew my friend was right. I had known it before ringing him, known it the second that I locked eyes with the strange man, whose form looked less and less human with every passing moment. But every jolt of dread was counteracted by a fresh surge of endorphins. I kept envisioning my new life, the one that I had been chasing for a decade, and I did what I was always going to do. I scribbled my name and the date on the contract, and then I thrust it back into Heath's hands. The man smiled, rolled off the edge of the chair, and then stood with the hunch in his back, seeming to worsen. I hope this mends you, Heath whispered ominously, before passing through the revolving doors. That very same evening, before I had done a thing, the growth began. My follower count on each social platform rose into the thousands, driven by some marketing scheme that I hadn't even seen unfold. But I wasn't complaining. I was happy to let Heath work his magic, happy to let him keep his secrets, given that I saw results on day one. The following morning, I received a thin, brown parcel in the mail. Inside was a packaged version of my unofficially released debut album, The Land, which had been collecting dust on SoundCloud for years. The vinyl sleeve depicted a sprawling forest of fir trees which stretched beyond the horizon. I also found a slip of paper at the bottom of the brown parcel. Sign below, Mr. Fen Davies, if you grant Red and Tinny Records the authority to officially release your debut album on Friday the 3rd, November 2023. I signed my name without bothering to call Paul and endure another lecture. I posted the letter immediately, but wondered how it would even arrive in time for Mr. Heath Brandon to release my album the following day. It was only later, upon admiring the mock-up vinyl of my album for a second time, that my opinion had started to shift, that the skyscraping trees took on a new life. The artwork was still striking, but it struck me with dread and not wonder. And the longer that I eyed the landscape, the more I felt threatened by the watching woodland. The more that I imagined in the darkened recesses of the forest, eyeballs rolling into skulls, yet still somehow seeing me. I flipped the vinyl sleeve over, not wanting to tarnish this exciting day. The day that I hoped would precede my meteoric rise to fame. I predicted, of course, a modest start. Whatever promotional campaign that Heath had planned, I expected my subscriber count on YouTube to reach several thousand, and I was excited for that. I was prepared for that and nothing more. But there was much more. I woke on Friday morning with a heavy rattling head, a wallet loaded with loose change, the groggy sensation that follows a restless night. In giddy anticipation, it kept me fidgeting in bed, and if I had known that The Land was scheduled for a midnight release, I wouldn't have slept at all. I would have been glued to social media as the unprecedented whirlwind began. But instead, I unlocked my phone around 10 in the morning to find a storm that had already been raging for hours. What the hell, Fen? I just listened to The Land. I'm sorry for being an arse. If I had known that you were sitting on such a gem, I would have been screaming at you to sign the contract. You're incredible, incredible, incredible. I beamed happily at the message from Paul, though I was simultaneously irritated that he hadn't been quite so mesmerized by The Land when I had finished it 3 years earlier. The music was the same, only my status had changed. Still, that thought quickly drowned in an avalanche of noise. A staggering number eyeballed me from the bottom of my screen. Atop the YouTube app was a red, bloated notification bubble, presenting an integer that seemed to be a glitch. 46,568. Heart squirming on my tongue, I hurriedly scrambled to check my channel. The notifications were real. I had 3,170 subscribers on Thursday evening. By 10:20 a.m. on Friday morning, I had almost 260,000. My videos had views in the hundreds of thousands, and the Spotify streaming figures were just as mind-melting. I received mentions on social media from everyone that I knew and nearly everyone that I didn't know. Mr. Lewis called me apologetically, begging for me to sign with his label. I declined. I didn't need him. My social media accounts had skyrocketed in traction, even the ones that I had abandoned years earlier. And this was only the beginning. Friday the 3rd, November 2023. By the evening of the following Friday, nobody would know my name. I begged for them to forget. Heath and I only corresponded by post, and there was a frequent stream of letters, back and forth. I sent each response to the following address: RTR Building, 11th Street, Lancashire, PR11, PR11. It is a non-existent place, as you'll see if you Google the address, but my letters were clearly being delivered because I was receiving responses from Heath. On Monday morning, I caught the Royal Mail driver at the post box. I asked him how he had managed to deliver my letters to a location that didn't exist, but the postal worker simply offered a frown. The puzzled man told me that he didn't recall seeing any letters addressed to such a place. The postcode, he said, obviously didn't exist. There returned that scraping churn in my gut, much like the one that I had felt when Heath Brandon's pupil spun towards the abyss behind his eyelids. Yet again, however, dopamine drowned my fear. I was thrilled about the idea of my first real gig on Tuesday the 7th of November, the O2 Ritz in Manchester. An old, well-known venue, but a small one. A good starting spring towards the rather more intimidating concerts. That was why I was so unprepared for the crowd outside of the venue. Fans blocked the road as my chauffeur attempted to safely ferry me towards the side entrance. And the vast majority of these people, I quickly realized, weren't even in the queue. These were folks who hadn't managed to gain tickets to a sold-out show. The folk behind my sudden rise to success. Something baffling dawned on me. The Ritz can house nearly 2,000 people, but I had already outgrown it. I was scheduled to perform at Wembley Stadium that Friday. Heath had promised great things, but this was beyond all I knew to be possible. It was an unprecedented rate of growth, and this scene made that apparent to me. Whitworth Street West was buried beneath an army. Whatever their goal, that was how the fans appeared to me. Militant, motivated. I had spent the weekend enjoying fame from a distance, and that car ride was my first graze with the outer world as a famous man. 3 million subscribers on YouTube after only 6 days of fame. Seeing those numbers on a screen had been intoxicating, but I hadn't mentally braced myself to see even a fraction of that number in the flesh. Not digits on my phone, but real people. A hungering, mindless mob surrounding my car and banging eagerly on its metalwork. They were obstructing any potential route from my vehicle to the Ritz. The gathering was disrupting the flow of traffic, though no authority seemed to care. Even the staff members in luminous jackets who should have been dispersing the disruptors or calling the cops were clamoring to peek inside my car, cupping hands against the tinted panes and scanning me with eyes that offered no insight into their cold thoughts. They were worryingly fixated upon me, the man who had been a nobody to them only a handful of days earlier. "Are we going to be able to reach the entrance?" I asked Ian, the chauffeur. When I turned to face him, however, I was horrified to find that the man was already staring at me, mouth grinning, eyes on the verge of watering. Throughout the drive, long before we had even reached Whitworth Street West, I had viewed him as a poor driver, speeding and swerving and nearly colliding with curbs and cars. But I realized that I had simply been avoiding the truth that I had seen in my peripheral vision. Ian had been driving terribly because he was repeatedly taking glances at me. "I'm a huge fan, Fen," the chauffeur whispered. I smiled, striving to look at anything but his possessed eyes. I locked onto his smile instead, but those curled lips perturbed me. Much like the members of the mob who had surrounded us, the driver was hungry. Dribble had trickled from his lips and coagulated in his facial hair, a sign that, as I had feared, he had been eyeing me in this way since the start of the journey. "Thank you, Ian," I replied nervously. "Anyway, how am I going to get inside the venue?" A tear escaped the driver's left eye, revealing something that told a different story from the one painted across his smiling face, a face that was practically quaking with ecstasy. "I'll dispose of them," he choked as if gasping for air. And then Ian unexpectedly burst something through the narrow canal of his compressed lips. I had never been so haunted by the mere sight of a tongue's tip, but it told a dreadful story. The snake moved almost imperceptibly from one side to the other, not quite licking lips, not quite doing anything human. It retreated to the depths of mystery behind the man's terrifying smile, and there followed a moment of stillness. I screamed when Ian slammed his foot onto the accelerator. He refused to avert his gaze from me as our vehicle tore forwards. The crowd scrambled to part down the middle, creating a safe passage for us. I closed my eyes and slammed my hands against my ears to mute the terrifying clunks of bodies falling off the bonnet. What horrified me more than the driver's series of near murders, however, was the unaffected temperament of the crowd. The injured fans didn't shriek but continued to squeal excitably, pounding on the windows as the car scorched past them. Ian only diverted his attention from me to look at the road for fleeting moments. He clumsily maneuvered to Rockwood Place at the side of the Ritz, finally providing me with a route of access to the stage door. "You're here," he croaked, tears now streaming down his cheeks as some foreign emotion passed across his face. I suddenly realized that none of these people were joyous, and the cause of their hysteria became a menacing mystery. It wasn't sadness, it seemed like some form of rage, but even that did not explain it. It was alien, an emotion that would have driven my fans to do terrible things if I had only allowed them to get close enough. Feeling Ian's smiling face inch closer, lips drifting farther apart to reveal that unnatural tongue once more, I fled the car in unbridled horror. It was a brief sprint from the vehicle to the stage door, but my calves felt limp and lifeless by the time that I reached it. My ears throbbed from the roar of the fans who had noticed me fleeing the vehicle. I heard the soles of shoes pounding against tarmac as they pursued me. "Let me in!" I screamed as I banged my fist painfully on the stage door. "Fen!" a girl screamed from the entrance to the alley, before descending into a frenzied spiral of repetition. "Look at me, Fen! Look, look, look!" I took a foolish glance to the side and saw a teenager at the forefront of the wide-eyed mob. I had seen videos of crowds swarming famous artists before, The Beatles, One Direction, but this wasn't that. It wasn't a mob of gleeful fans. Whatever disturbing emotion lurked in their eyes, it wasn't glee. They weren't happy to see me. I imagined that they would tear me limb from limb if they were to reach me. But part of me knew that a swift death would be better than whatever they really had planned. Moments before the wave of ravenous fans seized me, the stage door creaked open and I didn't wait for an invitation. I barged into the venue and locked the door a mere second before fists pounded against it, before bodies pounded against it, judging by the immense thuds. And when I finally had summoned the courage to spin on my heel, I expected to face yet another deranged fan, one who might bring about my end. Surprisingly, however, I faced a befuddled young woman wearing plaited hair, tattered jeans, and a black blouse. The name on her lanyard read, Gina Campbell. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No," I panted. "I'm so sorry for not answering straight away, Mr. Davies. If I had known what it was like out there, I would have been ready and waiting to let you inside," Gina said. I shook my head and took a deep breath. "It's not your fault. It's been a strange day, a strange few days." The woman nodded, looking at me with curious but refreshingly human eyes, and I saw something in her stare, something that I felt too. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't simply spluttering on my first spoonful of fame. This was all wrong, all horribly, horribly wrong. "I didn't even know your name last week. Now your name's all that I hear on TikTok. Your music too, obviously, though I haven't taken the time to learn the dance, I'm afraid." "Dance?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She smiled. "Oh, you're not that old, are you? The dance to your song, Eagle. It's lame, but your music isn't. I'm just surprised by how popular you've... Sorry, I didn't mean that. You're really good. It was rude of me to..." "No, I agree," I interrupted, laughing as I relished in my first normal interaction for days. "I wasn't ready for this. You're not the only person who knew nothing about me last Thursday. I'm convinced that I caught my own mother nearly calling me by my brother's name from time to time." Gina chuckled, motioning for me to follow her. "Well, come on, I'll show you to the dressing room. You've got an hour until your set starts, and I'll be back in about 40 minutes. Left to my own devices for a short while, I digested all that had happened with the unsettling mob in the street. I considered that I might have imagined things, might have been overwhelmed by the staggering success that I had experienced over the course of a few days. From an introvert to a concert headliner, from near poverty to riches. Give your head a wobble, Fen. They weren't monsters, they were people. You've not let your ego become so inflated that you view your fans as subhuman creatures, have you? They were only smiling, calling your name. It's Beatlemania, One Direction mania, Fan mania. But it wasn't, it was different. I knew what I had seen, just as I knew something terrible was coming for me. Around 6:45, Gina came to fetch me and I followed her along the long corridor towards the main stage area. "Have you met the members of your band yet?" she asked. "Band?" Heath had said that we're using backing tracks. How are there musicians who have learned how to play all my songs already? "And don't ask me," Gina shrugged, tapping the lanyard which bounced against her blouse. "I'm just a stagehand." The support band suddenly burst through a set of double doors ahead of us. I wanted to greet them, so I was a little disheartened when Gina shepherded me to one side. "I wouldn't say anything to them if I were you," she cautioned. "What? Why?" She frowned, nodding at one of the approaching band members. Glenn was unhappy that the crowd drowned out their performance by chanting your name endlessly. Towards the end of the set, he was vocal about that end. Gina didn't need to finish her sentence. I eyed the members of the synth-pop outfit as they walked past, quickly spotting Glenn's drenched shirt and shattered sunglasses. He bore a deep gash above his right eye, either from a stray shard of his damaged sunglasses or a projectile launched by the audience. Whatever the case, he looked disgruntled, and I was glad that he didn't spot me hiding to one side with Gina. I had no doubt that he would blame me for the crowd's reaction. Sorry about that. The vibe's been off today." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Are you ready to head up?" Gina asked. "We got 5 minutes." I shrugged. With a crowd like that, not really. She smiled warmly as if seeing me for the first time. "You really are a fish out of water, aren't you? You'll be fine, Fen, they don't bite." And I truly believed that as I walked onto the stage 2 minutes later. I truly believed that I had simply experienced a storm of success which would upturn anyone's mind. I took my guitar from Gina and stepped into the glow of the disorienting overhead lights. Euphoria gripped me as I hooped the Fender's nylon strap over my shoulder and prepared to adjust. Not only the strap, but my mind. I braced for the fame that I had spent half of my life craving, but as nearly 2,000 illuminated faces locked onto me, there erupted a cry which tore through my earplugs. It was not a cry of excitement, not a cry of pain. The audience's combined to scream rose and fell in some atonal melody from another realm. Yet the concertgoers' screeches synchronized perfectly, conveyed some feeling that they all shared. It was, once again, an emotion that didn't truly exist, not in a human sense. It was an emotion that petrified me, something deeper and darker than fury or malice. It was an unknown desire, but what I did know was that I no longer wanted to be there. No longer wanted to be followed by the unblinking eyes of my many fans. I paced from side to side, desperate to escape their tracking gaze, but it was useless. No stage would have been big enough. This isn't even that many fans. This is a pond and there's an ocean waiting for you beyond those doors. You're facing only 1,500 people and there are 3 million hungry sets of eyes searching for you. Maybe 4, 5, or 6 million by the time that you leave this place. The 2-hour set was a blur. A well-performed blur as far as I remember, but I'm sure the crowd would have applauded even if I had strummed the wrong strings, sung the wrong notes, or yelled that they were freaks who needed to bog off. And they applauded so enthusiastically, in fact, that some of them seemed to be in pain. I glanced at one woman who was pressed against the barrier below the stage, and her body seemed to be twitching in agony as she clapped her palms with excruciating force. I felt bittersweet relief when a smiling stagehand who surveyed me as greedily as the crowd nodded from beside the stage to indicate that it was time to wrap it up. "This is my last song, Eagle," I muttered, anxious that I might be slaughtered for daring to finish the set. "We love you, Fen," a man screamed, bawling as he did. "Love, love, love." I mumbled some nervous words of thanks after completing the encore, but not a soul responded. They were all hypnotized, and I watched in fright as every single member of the crowd continued dancing along after the music had stopped. 1,500 people performed the choreography to Eagle with unsettling synchronicity, reminding me of the eerily uniform cry that they had emitted when I first came onto the stage. There was nothing playing over the speakers and not a voice sounded from the crowd. The only sound in the room was the clicking and clacking of 1,500 pairs of squeaking soles against sticky tiles. My silent fans directed all focus towards the dance. "How was that?" Gina obviously asked as I stumbled down the stairs. "It was... What are they doing?" I asked weakly. The woman peered around the corner to take a look at the silently shuffling crowd. The audience was not shuffling home, however. They were shuffling in harmonious circles, as if they had spent hours learning not only the choreography, but learning how to perform it together. They were one awful glob of smiles that meant harm. These fans had ill wishes, whether they were aware of that or not. "TikTok, brain rot?" the stagehand suggested, shrugging. "Your chauffeur is waiting for you in the dressing room, by the way. Ian, is that right? He's a character. I don't want to go with him. I don't want to be near anybody right now." Gina frowned. "Shall I get you a glass of water, a chair maybe, so you..." I want to get out of here, I interrupted, starting to hyperventilate. That's all I want. I want to get out of here without bumping into anybody else. And that includes my batshit crazy chauffeur. Will you help me? You're the only person in here who isn't insane. I didn't know whether the stagehand had fully understood. Didn't know whether she had seen what I had seen. The insidious intent behind each smile, not only in the crowd but backstage, on the faces of her coworkers, on the face of my driver who lurked in my dressing room, waiting with a mouth that I was sure no longer hung partly open but fully wide, waiting to devour me, waiting to do something worse, something beyond my comprehension. I'm about to head home, the woman said uncertainly. Do you want a lift? Where do you live? My heart pounded as I pulled Gina to one side, hoping to dodge these stares of the other stagehands. Their faces followed me as they passed by. They offered slobbering grins and tongues that poked loose. West Didsbury, I whispered, not wanting another soul to hear. Gina sighed. Oh, that's a little out of my way, but okay. Thank you, I gushed. The stagehand led me away as hurriedly and discreetly as possible. We swerved past outstretching hands from murmuring staff members. Each hungering fan was stuck on one word or another as if glitching. Fen, more, me. I tried to not decipher the meanings of these deranged utterances. I kept my eyes fixed firmly forward as Gina led me through the fire exit. As I inhaled a satisfying lungful of air as we escaped onto the walkway by Rochdale Canal. Well, we made it, she exhaled. I parked by the train station, that's the only problem. I pulled my hood up, tightened the cord, and nodded. Let's just move quickly. Hopefully nobody spots me. We gave Whitworth Street West a wide berth and tiptoed tentatively through the bustling city center. Even after putting the Ritz behind us, however, Manchester's streets seemed to be filling with chants of my name. I wanted to believe that these were the chants of concert goers, but something told me that those 1,500 people were still inside the venue, still caught in a hypnotic soundless dance. Nevertheless, my lackluster disguise seemed to be sufficient as we made it to Gina's compact Kia without detection. She let out another heavy sigh once we were safely inside the car. That was intense. Do you want to ring your manager? No, I whispered, trembling. You really need security or something, Fen. Gina insisted as she pulled out of the car park. You're blowing up, and I've never seen an artist with your profile to be left so vulnerable, so exposed to the crowd. Have you ever seen a crowd like that before? I'm not pretending to be on the same level as international superstars, but I've personally never seen anything like that. Am I going crazy, or am I just seeing things? The woman didn't respond. She turned up the volume on the radio, having clearly heard something that I had missed. I tuned into what the presenter for BBC Radio Manchester was saying. Oh, it's been a big week for the fella. It seems like everybody's got fen fever, fen mania, whatever you want to call it. And look, I love the excitement. I've not seen this in the music industry for a long time, but this is just scary. It isn't right to harass a person, famous or not. To break into a home, I mean, it's madness. I'm just glad that he was performing tonight. If he had been at home, this could have been 1,000 times worse. This could have. What the hell did she just say? I blurted out. Getting hurt, the presenter continued. And some reports have claimed that several police officers joined the disruptors. So far, nobody from Greater Manchester Police has been willing to comment. Gina, I started shivering. Please don't tell me she means what I think she means. The stagehand's face had lost its color. I'm so sorry, Fen, this is awful. I'm just glad that you're safe. Why are they in my home? I cried, refusing to accept the reason. Where should I take you? Gina asked. I don't know, I screamed before taking a deep breath. I'm sorry, I'm not mad at you, I just don't understand what's happening. Well, that was a lie, of course. I knew full well what was happening. why it was happening. I had known it when I had penned my name to Heath's contract, known that there was something wrong with my manager. Just as I had known that no matter how much I listened to Paul's voice of reason, I was always going to sign that document. And when I thought of the manic messages that I had been receiving from Paul himself, along with other friends and family members, I realized that I had no good answer for Gina's question. I didn't know where to go, didn't know where I was safe. I prayed that there were others like the stagehand and the radio presenter. There had to be people outside the bubble of insanity. People who recognized that I was only a man, not some higher being. People who recognized, most terrifyingly, that my fans were no longer people. And the number of infected followers was only growing, as was my dread of what Fenmania truly entailed. I didn't want to know what these people really wanted from me. I don't have anybody, I admitted as we slowly trundled along Manchester's congested streets. I don't think I'm going home tonight. You need to call the police, Gina gulped. Did you hear what the radio presenter said? The police are crazy too. I saw it outside the Ritz earlier, you know. The people who should have been calming the crowd were a part of the crowd. You saw it backstage. Please answer my question, Gina. You see famous musicians in the Ritz every week. Have you ever seen a crowd like that before? She hesitated for a moment, contesting the truth, but the woman finally conceded, finally shook her head in defeat. No, the stagehand said. Those people were off the wall. Ask me this whole thing, the radio presenter continued. It's embarrassing. I loved NSYNC when I was a girl. I wanted to marry each and every one of them. Would I have stood outside their homes in the hope of seeing them? Sure, it wouldn't have been right, but I would have done it. Would I have broken into their homes and stolen their possessions? Absolutely not. Fen is a person, nothing more. If you've taken part in tonight's awfulness, you need to. Hello? There followed a pause, and my eyes were drawn to the radio, as if I might be able to stare through the plastic of the dashboard into BBC's Manchester studio. Might be able to see what was happening in the presenter's broadcasting room. I saw nothing, but I sensed it, heard it in the static traveling over the airwaves. There was somebody else in the broadcasting room, somebody watching the presenter, a person who had filled her body with some contagion that she had passed on to me. A communicatable dread transmitted through that symbol. Hello? She repeated, voice cracking. Sorry everyone, there's somebody in the... One moment, Jonathan. I think there might be... Wait, Jonathan, is that you? Fen is us. Us. A voice hissed in response. There followed a scream so unnatural that it took me a moment to realize that it had stemmed from the presenter herself, and the BBC did not cut to some sturdy, reassuring message about technical difficulties. They did not promise to handle the situation and resume normal broadcasting. All that sounded following the presenter's piercing shriek was the crackling drone of dead air. I live in Rusholme, Gina whimpered, pretending not to have heard. I'll take you there. We traveled the rest of the way in silence. Both of us eyed the passing cars and pedestrians fearfully, wondering whether a demented fan might lunge at any moment, might topple Jeannie's titchy Kia without much resistance at all and then tear me out, do with me whatever worshippers do when they have a god in their clutches. Fen is us. I finally understood the emotion that I had seen on their faces. It was love and hate combined. It was such an impossible marriage of humanity's fiercest emotions that it had rendered my followers inhuman. I realized that even they might not know what to do with me once they had me. Ian had certainly seemed unsure as to what he had wanted when his face was only inches from mine. I didn't want to give any of my haunting followers the chance to make a decision. When we arrived in Gina's quiet cul-de-sac, I was relieved to find her street empty. I thought back to that very same morning. I had been bubbling with excitement at the prospect of being swarmed by bright-eyed fans. But when I had been faced with the reality of that, I had wanted nothing more than to fade back into obsolescence. After she led us into her home, my savior silently wandered up to bed. I slumped onto the sofa, still not quite accepting what had happened. Gina was a beautiful woman, roughly my age, and I would have been ecstatic at the prospect of winding up in her home under any other circumstances. But I was thinking of the unnatural things that I had witnessed at the Ritz, thinking of what I had heard on the radio. I didn't want to access the internet, didn't want to learn the truth, but trying to sleep would have been pointless, so I searched for answers, and it didn't take long to find them. I wasn't shocked by the 20 million YouTube subscribers and not even the billion views on Eagle, my biggest single by far. What shocked me was the plain truth that very few people cared about the radio presenter. Gina and I hadn't been hearing things, however. The Manchester Evening News had already reported on the situation. Police responded to concerned calls from the handful of sane listeners, but they found only the presenter's wedding ring. It swam in a shallow puddle of blood on her abandoned chair. Additionally, the injured musician from the support band had gone missing shortly after the show. His bandmates were unaware as to his whereabouts, but foul play was suspected. Some reports did comment on the injury that he had sustained during his set. In spite of the nastiness involving my fanbase, however, the media frenzy surrounding my name from both official sources and the public remained positive, or at the very least, not negative. Everything came back to that false emotion, that unholy mixture of love and hate. Fen. I am Fen. The land speaks to me. I will burn all others, burn the world until all is Fen. I spent the night reading messages such as those, tortured myself well into the early hours of the morning, and it took hours for an idea to finally strike me. I searched for a pen and paper and then started scribbling a blunt message for Heath. Get me out of this contract. I included my new temporary address and rushed home, praying that no crazed fan would find the letter, and I posted it before the sun rose. You should lie low, Gina said over breakfast. I don't know whether you've seen things online, but I've seen, I sharply interrupted, not wanting any reminders. Thank you, Gina, you didn't have to help me. I mean, you still don't. I don't want you to put yourself in danger. She waved a hand. I'm not going to send you out there. People are going missing, Fen. Not just the presenter and the musician. There have been all sorts of strange stories this morning. And that only worsened over the following days. I remained inside on Wednesday and Thursday and tried to ignore news stories of disappearances, altercations between my fans and those who dissented. It was starting to feel far bigger than me, far bigger than even the tens of millions following me. Civilization was disintegrating. On Friday, the day of the dreaded Wembley performance, Heath's response finally came. To Mr. Fen Davies, regarding your inquiry, I ask you to first reflect on last Thursday's consultation. Did I not caution you, Mr. Davies? You have the gumption to succeed, but perhaps not the persona, not the pretty bow to wrap around your talent. I imagine that you have written to me out of fear. I see no mention of your legal friend. Are you afraid to talk to him, perhaps? Afraid that you might find yourself speaking to a man that you hardly recognize? Fortunately for you, there is an unwritten termination clause, but I am a man of business, first and foremost, Mr. Davies. I seek only to safeguard my interests. Therefore, you will attend the show at Wembley Stadium tonight. I will find you and we will discuss the termination of your contract. But there is still a performance scheduled to happen, and happen it must. Signed, Mr. Heath Brandon. You have a friend who could get you out of this mess, Gina asked as she read the letter after me. I shook my head. Paul's not Paul anymore. I opened my phone and read his most recent message. Fen, talk. Fen, talk. I have to meet Heath, I said. Have to hope that he'll give me a way out of this. Do you want me to come? She murmured. I shook my head again. I'm going to London, Gina. It's too far and too dangerous. You've done so much for me already. You need to wait here. Wait until things look a little more normal again. Gina nodded sheepishly, seemingly embarrassed that she had offered. I thought for a moment about the prettiness of her flushed cheeks, realized that I probably would have asked her out to coffee under different circumstances. We might have got along had it not been for the awfulness of that night at the Ritz. Friday, the 10th of November. I bumped into her again months later, but she didn't recognize me. Much like everyone else, she didn't remember the true horrors of November. I did not contact my chauffeur to take me to London. I didn't contact anyone. Didn't respond to the hundreds upon hundreds of messages from my loved ones, who were no longer my loved ones at all. Messages from my mother and father, Paul, people who had been assimilated to some homogeneous thing that sought only to consume me, sought to assimilate me too. I had to undo everything and bring my loved ones back. I had to bring everyone back. Donning a low-effort but effective disguise of a hooded jacket and a pair of Gina's sunglasses, I boarded a train from Manchester to London. No passengers recognized me, but my skin tightened as I overheard one particular conversation. "You love Fen, don't you?" one girl asked. "I do," her friend replied. "Good. Sarah didn't love him." "No, she didn't," the second girl coldly said. "Yeah, Sarah's quiet now." "Yes," the second girl agreed. "Sarah's quiet." In the reflection of my window, I squinted at the two girls who appeared to be in their late teens. They sat across the aisle from me, horrifyingly close. Close enough for me to see their eyeballs tumbling backwards, spinning towards their upper eyelids. Much like Heath Brandon, each girl was left with only the very edge of their pupils on display, and that felt more horrible than their eyes showing only the whites. Still seeing the faintest sliver of those brown pupils was far, far worse. I wish that I had turned away from the reflection sooner. Wish that I hadn't seen something emerge from the first girl's mouth. Not a tongue as I had expected, but an index finger. The appendage tried to escape, but it was swiftly swallowed by the girl. And then, as I covered my mouth to stifle the scream, I saw her left eye momentarily slide to the side of the socket. It revealed a second eyeball vying to look out, but the girl tapped her temple to regain control. Her eyeball slid back into place, reclaiming the socket by pushing the second one away, pushing it into the back of her head. That 2-hour journey was both the shortest and longest trip of my life. Time and space did not exist in that disturbing land. I prayed that the hoodie and Gina's bulky sunglasses would distort my appearance enough not to draw attention, for I knew without a doubt that the two girls were not the only deranged passengers on the train, and I certainly knew that they wouldn't be the only ones outside the train. Navigating London was the greatest hurdle. A city of 9 million people, my subscriber count had hit 100 million on YouTube that morning. It was safe to say, given my rate of growth, that a high percentage of these city folk crossing my path belonged to Fen's hungry pack of fans. My name echoed around the capital's packed streets, sometimes hushed and other times fanatically bellowed. I used the many bodies of London commuters and tourists to conceal my hooded form as I made my way across the city center. And then I found a bus that took me directly to Wembley Stadium, and I curled into a ball on the back row. I shrank and hid from the dozens of Fen fanatics who were chattering around me. That chatter quickly devolved into nothingness, an endless stream of repeated words that had lost all meaning. I was thankful that the fans beside me did not attempt to start a conversation. I was certain that they would spot me if they were to give me a moment's worth of attention. That journey felt endless, but I made it to Wembley with all limbs still firmly attached. We arrived on the top level of a multi-story car park around 6 in the evening, 1 hour before my show was set to begin. I waited for everybody else to depart the coach before I dared to stand, but I didn't hang around. I had an objective more vital than the all-consuming one that I had been pursuing for a decade. I was there to beg Heath for an end to this nightmare. As I exited the bus and made my way across the top story of the deserted structure, my chest started to pound. The fans had already vanished, and not being able to see the evil was terrifying. I felt like an exposed wound. For a beautiful moment, I wondered whether Heath had already worked his magic, wondered whether he had already nullified my contract and made everybody forget me. The sound of clapping shattered my fantasy. I followed the growing roar of applause to the structure's top floor barrier, and one of Wembley Stadium's entrances came into view. There stood a crowd of thousands below the not-so-distant building, tens of thousands. From my elevated position, I spotted a slight clearing at the center of the crowd. Dozens of hands were hoisting something up into the air, and by the time that something came into view, it was too late. Not something, but someone. It was the musician for my supporting act at the Ritz, the one who had chastised the crowd for chanting over his performance. The frightened man's voice traveled hundreds of yards to my watching point from atop the multi-story car park. "Help! Somebody please!" The musician was shushed by thousands of whispering voices and fingers on lips, and then the man's wriggling body was slotted not into the gaping jaws of one particular crowd-goer, but the fan's gaping eye socket. The musician's body slowly disappeared into the fan's very skull. The artist's fingers were the last to disappear. I wasn't sure how my eyes saw the horrific details from hundreds of yards away, but nothing from those days answered to the laws of logic. I wish, of course, that I hadn't seen each twisting extremity slip into the nothingness behind the fan's rolling eyeball, just as I wish that I hadn't recognized the man who had consumed the musician. Paul. "There must be a show." A voice spoke from behind me. I spun to see, illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby lamppost, the hunching figure that I had met in the lobby of a recording studio. It had been little more than a week, but it felt like an age. "What have you done to me?" I croaked. I considered lunging forward, but I was haunted by the figure's unnatural appearance. His body seemed to hide something. It seemed to be hunching not from poor posture, but a desire to conceal his true nature, to conceal whatever festered behind the whites of his eyes. His rolling pupils clearly saw something not above him but within his head. I thought of the way that Paul had absorbed the musician through his bulging eye socket, thought of the fingers that I had seen crawl out of the girl's mouth on the train. I accepted the terrible truth that I had already suspected. My fans were not simply killing people, but taking them away from the world. Sarah's quiet now, and those quiet folk, much like me, had been forgotten by all of you. "What have I done?" Heath asked icily. "I have done nothing to you, Fen." "To them," I corrected. "What have you done to them?" "Only that to which you agreed," the man replied. His smile was worse than it had been in the lobby. Unlike the expressions of my many fans, Heath's grin did not simply convey some alien emotion that I struggled to place. It did not convey any emotion. "What are you?" I asked. "So many questions, but time is fleeting, Fen. Did you now want to discuss the termination of your contract?" "Is that possible?" I asked, struggling to believe that such a nightmarish contract would come with an exit clause. "Yes. However, the show must continue. If I lose you, I must have another. I must have a performer to take your place." "Where am I supposed to find a performer?" I scoffed. The man handed over the clipboard which held the contract that I signed 9 days earlier, and then he tapped a finger beside the line that contained my signature. "Cross out your name and find another to sign here," he explained. "That'll nullify the contract. These people will stop chasing me, they'll stop hurting others in my name." "They will forget these 9 days entirely," Heath promised. I looked down at the contract, realizing that this was not an end to the horror, it was simply a fresh chapter. People were going to suffer under the banner of whichever big name would come after me. Suffer a fate worse than death. Suffer in prisons beyond the watchful, spinning eyes of the masses. They would be damned to spend a lifetime in oblivion for daring to question the will of the mob. "Heath," I began, looking up from the clipboard. The crooked man had, of course, blown away in the chilling autumn breeze, vanished entirely from sight, and my eyes were pulled once again towards the barrier at the edge of the car park, pulled not by noise but rather the lack of noise. My gut swelled like a black balloon as I took timid steps forwards, and it burst when I peered over the edge. The thousands upon thousands of fans waiting on Wembley's doorstep were all standing motionlessly. They had all turned around to stare directly up at the top of the car park, to stare directly at me. I understood the dread that had been burgeoning for days. This was the forest that had watched me from the album cover for The Land. The crowd was the forest that stretched far beyond the horizon, into the abyss, and I screamed when the people started to move as I had expected them to remain rooted to the ground, much like the trees. But they charged at an unearthly speed, moving rapidly towards the bottom story of the car park. I realized that I was trapped, and there wasn't time to descend 3 stories and flee through the main entrance, not without meeting the wall of salivating fanatics. My eyes locked onto the man leading the pack, the man who had pushed his way to the forefront of the charge. It was Paul, and he, much like the others, didn't look away from me as he sprinted forward. 10 or 20,000 parasitic people cranked their heads backwards as they approached the bottom of the car park. They strained to keep their white, hungry eyes glued to the man above them. I finally willed my legs to run, though I did not expect to escape. I was simply after a quicker end. As I scurried down each level of the structure, following the white arrows of the tarmac, the roar of the crowd grew. The entire car park threatened to collapse under the weight of thundering feet, and I stopped on the mid-level, finding myself face to face with Paul. My friend had soared far ahead of the pack, and we eyed one another for several silent seconds. He wore a face cosmetically like that of my dear friend, but his expression did not belong to Paul. Gone was the class clown who had perched on my windowsill at 4 in the morning, thrown the window open and drunkenly serenaded our campus with a looping rendition of Wonderwall. Gone was the brain laugh that he had unleashed as our fellow students begged him to either stop or perform any other song. Gone was my best friend. In his place was a rabid animal that showed no sign of slowing. Paul didn't even notice the clipboard in my trembling hands. Much like those university students so many years earlier, my pleas were ignored. He barreled into me, sending me to the gravel. "Fen, fen, fen," Paul repeated with labored breathing as a droplet of spittle hit my eye. "Paul, please," I begged, squirming beneath him as other fans approached. "I don't know what you and the others want from me, but—" "We are you," he growled, pupils locking not onto me but the top of his eyelids. And then my friend's cheek pushed outwards and the haunting outline of fingers reshaped his skin. The musician within Paul's skull fought to be freed. I closed my eyes and prepared to meet the same terrible end. Prepared to join the mass, for we were all Fen. "Why you? I want it, want it, want it," Paul asked. I knew what he desired, and I knew that he shouldn't have it. I would have chosen death over sentencing my friend to the perils of fame, but that wasn't an option. Even the musician's horrible fate wasn't an option. It was clear to me that the crowd had planned something far worse for their god. To devour me wouldn't be enough, and I feared that unknown fate above all else. So I did a cowardly thing. "Fine, Paul," I cried as I reached towards the falling clipboard beside me. "I've got it right here. You just have to sign and then you'll be me. You'll have..." Paul startled me by quickly unpinning my body and rising to his feet, and then snatching the clipboard from my quaking hands. And my old friend didn't even hesitate. Did not say a word, in fact. He simply snatched the pen which was attached to the top of the board by a jangling chain, and etched his name beside my own, the one that I had crossed out. Paul signed the contract moments before the mob reached my body, moments before I would have discovered what they had planned for me. The runners at the forefront of the crowd stopped, halting those behind them, and they were human for a fraction of a second. My old fans looked around in confusion, not knowing how they had arrived at such a place. But then they started to turn their rolling eyes towards my friend, slowly, serenely, and soundlessly. "Paul?" one man whispered. "Paul, do you have a song for us, Paul?" Give. A girl panted, her calm demeanor on the verge of shifting back into one of struggling breathing. None of them saw me any longer. Their heads followed the new Messiah who had risen like a phoenix from the ashes of my fetal form. I watched in fear as Paul's face had changed too, as he became human again. It was a lasting transformation for him. His complexion turned pale and his mouth opened to release not words, but a flesh-colored liquid which spilled onto the ground. It contained strips of fabric and shards of eyewear, the remnants of the musician my friend clearly did not recall consuming. "Fen?" he asked, noticing me. "Are you... what did I..." "You have to find somebody else, Paul," I begged. "Find someone else to sign it or they'll..." Before I had a chance to finish, my friend ran straight to the store's side door and used the staircase to flee. A staircase that in my blind panic, I hadn't even considered as a potential exit route. It thankfully took a few seconds for the crowd to return to their fanatical state, but they wasted no time in pursuing Paul. And as that new wave of phantom hit the world, it caught me too. I know this because my memories of the next few days are foggy, and that's how I know that all records from Friday the 10th of November to Tuesday the 14th of November must be false, much like the records for my 9 days of fame. I have no idea what truly happened during those 4 days of Paul's stardom, but I know that he did not find a new artist for Mr. Heath Brandon. My friend has been missing for 9 months. I fear with near certainty that he met the fate which awaited me.